the economy gets rough, do people keep buying? Short answer, yes, they're just more selective about who they buy from. So how do you position yourself to make sure you're the person they want to spend their money with? So the good news is that whatever happens economically, and let's be fair, there's quite a few economists who are saying that by 2030, we're going to be having a tough time if we aren't by the end of 2025. However, that's not necessarily bad news, especially if you're preparing for it and positioning yourself for it now, because people will keep buying. In fact, they will typically spend more money. We've been through a few recessions that we've studied as an economy as a whole, and we know that people keep buying money. In fact, they will spend more money on a sure thing than they will on the cheap stuff. It's the middle ground stuff that's likely going to get weeded out of the market. Here's what happens when the economy does start to get rough. There are people who are going to have money to put into marketing, and if your marketing is going dark and people can no longer remember that you're even there as an option, it doesn't really matter if you fall in the high end or the low end of that price point or right smack dab in the middle. They won't be spending their money with you. So what do we do instead? And how do we make sure that you're positioned for your marketing to continue to keep going out even as you're getting busy having to run other parts of your business? Because we do know that in economic turmoil, we do have to adapt a little bit more. This is part of the strength of small business owners, is we can adapt, but that requires a little bit of engagement from you, right? So the first thing you're going to want to do is build out a marketing baseline. A marketing baseline are all of the activities that you need to be doing on a regular basis. So whether that is daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly, to market your business consistently. I encourage you, especially if you haven't built a baseline anytime recently, to start with realistic anchor points. So maybe start with saying, hey, I want to email my list once a month if you haven't been doing that at all. I want to go to one networking event per week. Maybe you've been going to 1 or 2 per month and you want to up the ante there. I want to get 2 posts on social media out per week. And maybe that's all you start with until you can get consistent with those few things. Now, if you're not sure what to put on your baseline, this is where you're going to need to back up a little bit and figure out what is your marketing message and who is your target market. Now, I always tell people, and there's lots of videos on my channel about figuring out who your target market is and the fact that you don't need to niche down. A lot of people say you need to niche down. That's a whole separate issue. You don't. That's just their way of saying you need to be memorable, and a niche can be super memorable, but it doesn't have to be. You're allowed to have as many target markets as you want. You just need to know them, especially if you don't know what activities to put on your baseline. You need to know who you're marketing to, and you need to know who you're marketing to from like their demographics, but also where do they hang out online and offline, and what are their psychographics? How do they think? And you should know this for each group. You may have 5 or 6 groups you market to because you market to single moms in their 30s. You also market to college students in their early 20s. Like, you can have those different groups. You just need to know them so that you can then look at your message and say, this is what I'm trying to communicate. Here's who I need to put it in front of. What do I need to do to actually get my message in front of these people? That is what will tell you what to put on the baseline. Now, once you have your baseline, you've been able to get it executed consistently. Now is time to start outsourcing some of those pieces. You may not be able to outsource the entire thing. For example, you may decide, hey, I'm not an email person. I don't want to be sending emails every single week, but I could create the topics and then hire a VA or writer to write the content, put it together, and send it to me to read and review and adjust before it actually goes out. So you spend time at the beginning of every month coming up with topics, and then they send you an email every single week to edit and send out for them. That could make your life a lot simpler. Take the part you don't love off your plate and allow you to focus on the stuff that you do want to be engaged with. Now, as a rule of thumb, I don't usually recommend outsourcing anything until you've done it a few times so that you are able to know what you do and don't want to be happening there. But if you find a really good option to outsource to right off the bat, feel free. What is going to be really helpful when you are outsourcing, though, is going to be to write some sort of standard operating procedure. So something like, I will do this, then you need to do this by this time each week or each month, and then I'll do this, and then you'll do this. It doesn't have to be complicated. Everyone has this idea that it needs to be like complex. It doesn't need to be complex. Keep it really simple for yourself. But you should have a process, and you should be written into your process at least a little bit, because you probably need to do some quality control in there. Now, as a side note here, it's really, really important that when you start outsourcing stuff, if you're going to outsource any portion of the actual creation, whether that is video planning, whether that is blogs, whether that is social posts, whatever, you need to have some sort of document that gives people guidance on your brand voice and your message and what does and doesn't work. So you might want to take some time to put all that together. And then once you've got your SOP in place and it's starting to run consistently, don't be afraid to edit it. If you need to go in once a month and look at what's working and what's not in your processes, then that's great. And remember that you can do small tweaks. You don't have to rebuild the wheel constantly. Remember that good marketing should be flexible, consistent, and clear. And your SOPs should also be flexible, consistent, and clear. Marketing when the economy gets rough is not optional, it is strategic. People aren't buying less, they're buying smarter. So what can you do to make sure you are the person that they want to spend that money with? Pick one thing, start working on it today, and then join us back here because we'll have more ideas coming out in a couple of weeks.